Hello everybody and welcome to a very special edition of the Lunatic Creative video podcast. As I said, it's a special edition because we're going to be talking exclusively about the PlayStation and N64. As you can see from the description below, we chose this because this is one of the biggest sort of video game battles in history. It's the one that I think meant the most to us as video game players, as I was right around, we were 9, 10 years old. It set the
tone for the console wars.
We were sort of thrown into the SNES Genesis war. We didn't get to see the beginning of that, we were too young. But we got to see the beginning of the PlayStation and N64, and we got to see the end and all the aftermath. So let's talk a little bit about this huge battle. And I guess where we should start is, what did you have, and what did you have first? Mm-hmm. When it comes to PlayStation and N64.
So, I had the PlayStation first, and I remember when I first had the opportunity of getting it, where my dad bought it for me, and my grandma. Playing the PlayStation in the KB Toys, or whatever the toy stores were back then, and Star Wars Knights of Tyranid Nask was on there, and it was a fighting game versus game, and I remember playing, you could play as several iconic Star Wars characters, as well as some expanded universe characters like Mara Jade. So you had like your original lineup: Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, Boba Fett was in there. You could be a Tusken Raider, and then you had Darth Vader and a couple bad guys. But it was really cool because it was a dimensional fighting game. Each of them had special moves, and it was like really just invigorating with all the whole universe in there. Like different levels. Like you had a Tatooine level. You had a level that was the Endor shield generator, and you fought on top of where like the ships would land. And to me, that my dad said, which one do you want to get? And the 64 did really well, but for me, I was just so entranced, and I even said to my dad, these CDs will take off better. There's no way this cartridge could be.
And you're right. And I'd like to add, N64 games were more expensive at the time. Some of them being $70. PlayStation games, for the most part, were $40.
Yeah,
which
like
was
40,
nice.
50
It was
bucks.
cheaper, the same game, and better for my sake, because you could fit more content on the disc. You could fit video content, audio content, full motion videos. Like those existed in the form of the Sega CD and the Sega Saturn, but PlayStation really went. You could put a whole cutscenes on cutscenes, and that's how Metal Gear Solid sort of got started, because there's no limitations with cutscenes. You could have voice actors come into play. This is when the first voice acting in video games started.
Yeah, there wasn't
because
really
of
much
the
voice
PlayStation.
acting in 64.
There wasn't need. They couldn't really in N64 because the limitations of the cartridge. You can only do so much with the sound.
I think the only sound you really heard was the fairy from Zelda. Listen! That was it.
Yeah, and Tony Hawk Pro Skater is a good illustration of this, because they had a full soundtrack on PlayStation. It's 10 to 12 songs. On the N64, they had parts of the songs there, or they had songs with no lyrics, or they had songs with one verse and the other two verses cut out. So you were missing the full experience. That's why I like PlayStation. I liked it a lot for... It was also the start of 3D gaming in general. But actually, my history with it, got the PlayStation for Christmas. I think it was the year after it came out, which is great. And then I wanted an N64 bad. A neighbor had it. I saw Super Mario 64. That was sort of the selling point game for N64. And, I really wanted this. I saw the other things that were on. NBA Hang Time was a big thing there. They had a Mortal Kombat game, so I was into that. I remember for my half birthday, I actually got $50. Went to Toys R Us back then they were sold out. It was months after the release, they were still sold out every time you go. I thought it'd still be sold out when I went. I went to put over $50 down to reserve the next shipment. Lo and behold, it was there. My mom, nice enough to buy it for me. So then I was a lucky kid with two systems, so I got to compare. And what I'd say is, if I had to choose, if like NHL 99 was on N64, was on PlayStation, I was going to get it on PlayStation every time. The full motion video, the graphics definitely looked a little... Like, they were different. I wouldn't say better or worse. Some games you could maybe make the call that one system was better or worse than the others.
PlayStation was
but
128, correct?
Different.
It was 128.
It was technically 128 bit.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But at that point, the bits started to mean less and less. Like a game like N64 did, or a game like Super Mario 64 did 3D extremely well. And that's like, and then you're like, oh, so this is a 3D console. But then you play Crash Bandicoot, and it wasn't as like expansive, and the open world wasn't there like Super Mario 64 was. But it was, the 3D was very unique. It was like it was a platform. It was like what you think of platform in 3D.
The 3D in Crash was definitely more defined. Like even looking back at 64 now, you can see how cubic the characters are then, you know, like Mario's mustache is basically a bunch of cubes. I feel like the dimensions
it
in
didn't age
PlayStation
well.
were more defined. Like, you know, it wasn't just some giant cylinder with two big, you know, circle eyes. You could see Crash's defined, like, you know, triangular S-shaped, you know, oval head body.
And this was the first time, like, as a sports gamer, I'm a huge sports gamer, so like that sort of was my way into like video game fandom and buying the magazine and stuff, was to follow sports games. And that's when they first started to do motion capture. So people would put all those light bulbs on them, act out the sport animation, and then that sort of helped with the polygons and things. And I think that was a primarily PlayStation. I think they could do more with that, from what I could see with the polygons and whatnot there.
Everything was solely based in the 64 was solely based coming off of a computer, where the PlayStation could take elements of motion capture and use those videos from motion capture to create something on the computer a little more, you know, realistic and meaningful.
It seemed more realistic. Now the other thing, if you look back, the N64 library was not as big as I think we thought of it as kids. I think it was less than 200 games. It was not. The Nintendo lost the third parties by the end of it, just like they lost third parties by the end of the Wii, and that's why the Wii U suffered so much. They lost third parties by the end of the lifespan of the N64 because of the technological limitations it has that we talked about with the full motion video and the motion capture and all this stuff. So, but the core Nintendo games were done right. I don't think anyone could argue Mario 64, phenomenal. Ocarina of Time, phenomenal. Mario Kart.
The Mario parties were all...
Mario Party started there. Super Smash. The games that Nintendo does, their first party games, they did them right there.
I think
I
think for both the systems, yeah, there was a Donkey Kong 64. It wasn't as well received as they wanted it to be. But I think when you really break down those systems, and I still think this is something that stands today, is that when you play Nintendo games, the Nintendo core games that Nintendo makes are always the best games, but you always want to play them with people. Nintendo makes their system to be played with multiple people.
But that was the other big thing, 4 controller slots.
Yeah, and that was really cool too.
That was big.
PlayStation later had to make the adapter to bring in 4.
And they actually went up to 8 with that, but it was not utilized in many games, mostly fighting games. And what was or sports games was really the only thing they could be used for.
Yeah, I think Madden and
NHL, you could things like that. So
but for overall PlayStation and 64, so 64 had like the core Nintendo games that played well with other people. I think in terms of
colored controllers.
I think in terms of individuality and like single player games, yes, Nintendo has its Banjo-Kazooie and it has its Zelda, but I think overall in general PlayStation had more better single player games. You had Soul Calibur. The best I think ever PlayStation game ever created was Mega Man Legends and Mega Man Legends 2, and they're two of the rarest PlayStation games out there too. If you find one sealed, it's like $300. And then in terms of multiplayer games, obviously lots of the sports games were great, but Twisted Metal probably set the bound for the multiplayer experience, because nobody ever thought it's a racing game. This was the first one to bring in a deathmatch style of racing, and then later that turned into you had sequels to that. You had,
and it was edgy.
Yeah, and then you had Vigilante 8, which came out. So, and then Vigilante 8, and then you had Rogue Trip, and then the second Vigilante 8. So I think, and you know, they eventually crossed platforms. You could play them on 64, but those particular games did so well, and I think most people knew for playing PlayStation about Twisted Metal. That was actually one of the first games that I had for PlayStation, was Twisted Metal 2. The characters were unique. It had definitely Mad Max feel to it, like a post-apocalyptic world. And that game was great.
Exclusive-wise, what you're forgetting is that PlayStation got Square Enix to jump ship when it came time. And again, that was due to technological limitations, a lot of it. So they jumped from where you could only get Final Fantasy games on the SNES. Now, if you want to play like a good JRPG, you had to go the Sony route. And it kind of makes sense, you know, because, again, like, they could tell a better story with those cutscenes. And the cutscenes became a thing. Metal Gear Solid was an exclusive that I think sold systems. Final Fantasies. I'm trying to think of any other.
Chrono Cross. And I think the other thing, too, is the Japanese market for the PlayStation. There were so many more games that you could get on the PlayStation than the 64, because the 64 had particular amount of Japanese games, but they weren't that big. You can get Smash in a Japanese version, and the cover looks really cool. But the PlayStation games, in terms of like the Japanese releases, there was tons. There's probably way over 200 PlayStation releases.
Oh yeah.
Plus, I feel like the
Sony
lifespan of PlayStation lasted longer, obviously because of compact discs.
Yeah. And there was another. You don't think of it now, but back then people were still like, "Oh, I'm buying CDs. I need something to play my CDs on."
Yeah, yeah.
And it could play CDs. Cool thing is, a lot of PlayStation games, you put them in a CD player, it plays the soundtrack from it. So discs won out over cartridges because the only thing in cartridge-wise that was popular in media was video games. So Sony made the right choice, I think, 100% going disc-based with this, and I think it paid off because. As I would say, the N64, I think, especially with kids our age back then, was sort of the leader. But as time went on, as people started to mature, as your gaming interests sort of became more diverse, and you weren't just going to be like saying, "Oh, this is something I see in Nintendo Power. I want it. It's a cute fucking game with Kirby on it." You started to gravitate towards PlayStation because there was more openness, I think, for developers to try something new. There was new intellectual properties all the time. Spyro,
memory cards. You could save.
Oh, that was a big
thing. The memory cards were probably one of the biggest things.
But that was a drawback to PlayStation.
You could save.
N64 didn't need the memory cards
because it was built in.
On-disc
but the cool thing about the memory card was you could take it to your friend's house too. So that it has drawbacks because you can't. You know, you had to buy the separate thing, but it was nice because if you wanted to go over to your friend's house and play a game with them, you wouldn't necessarily have to have the onboard hard drive like the 64 did. So the memory card was kind of cool too because. You know, it had a longevity to it in terms of like all the games that could save content, like Tony Hawk, like
sports
especially
games.
Mega Man sports games. You know, tons of awesome things for the memory card. But the downside was they were pretty expensive, were like $30, I think.
Yeah,
for the memory card.
What was I think the equivalent of like 4 megabytes of data to show how far we've come, ladies and gentlemen. What was I gonna say about the PlayStation?
What's your all-time favorite PlayStation game?
Well, I'd say
64 all-time favorite game.
My
and then I'll tell you
favorite
mine.
PlayStation, I think I have to go with Tony Hawk 2. I think the Tony Hawk series was very important to me when I was younger. It sort of took me up along with a bunch of other kids my age and sort of my group of
2
friends.
2 was the one that introduced the manual, no? Or is that 3?
2 had the manual, 3 had the revert.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. And just 1 was just... skateboarding was never bigger than that. You know, as Tony Hawk hit the 900, the game came out. They couldn't have had better timing. The music set the tone. There's actually a bunch of skateboarding games coming around that time. I think there Thrash, something.
Yeah, that one. That one tried to be like,
it was realistic.
It tried to be like skate, but it
wasn't.
Just
it wasn't there yet.
Yeah,
the technology wasn't there yet. It was good for an arcade game like Tony Hawk. So I'd have to go with that.
And Extreme Sports.
Playing 2
that
players.
That was an awesome game.
Oh, Extreme Sports.
You can
Road Rash. Was that?
No, that was the one with the motorcycle.
Yeah, but that was on PlayStation.
Yeah.
They had like a lot of early games that were not as 3D and graphically pleasing as the later ones, but were really fun. Then there's a whole list of sports games like Madden 99 I played a lot of, NBA Live 99, 2000. Actually, my first NBA Live was 98, and all those were on the PlayStation, and I got a bunch of off-brand baseball games. It was really a crazy time. Castlevania, Symphony of the Night was on PlayStation. That was groundbreaking, like we mentioned before, Metal Gear Solid. N64, I'd probably say Mario 64. I played the crap out of that when I first got it, and it was I've never played a game like that before at the time. It was an open world. You go around, do things at your own pace. It was super fun. But then I got sucked in. My first introduction to Mario Kart really was a 64 because I didn't have an SNES, so I played the crap out of that. But maybe Shadows of the Empire, Star Wars, because it was a licensed property game that was actually really good.
So you'd have to say 64 is definitely, it's either Mario or Shadow of the Empire.
Yeah, and I guess Mario will give the edge
over Rogue Squadron?
I didn't play as much Rogue Squadron by the time that came out. I was sort of all on the PlayStation and Dreamcast bandwagon at that point, so I was sort of... I mean, the pod racing game was really good. Those came out.
Yeah, that did well. I remember playing that. I never.
Although I should say for the Dreamcast, I think Crazy Taxi came out. Hydro Thunder. I think some arcade games came out. Not as good graphically as Dreamcast, and I want to have a Dreamcast episode because that's my favorite console. But PlayStation, yeah, N60. That was great.
What was your all-time favorite PlayStation game? Tony Hawk 2?
Tony Hawk. Let's go with 2. It improved everything on 1. But again, like the first experience of putting in 1. Actually, N64 favorite game, WWF No Mercy. I was a huge wrestling fan, and it had it has more characters than the wrestling games now. It's insane. A great story mode, fun to play with 4 players, a ladder match, a cage match. It was that is what it was anticipated because it was an exclusive of the N64. The PlayStation wrestling games, although good, were not up to that gameplay standard because 2 different studios made them. So let's go No Mercy on N64 on the PlayStation. Let's give it to Tony Hawk 2. What about you?
So mine would probably be I'll do 64 first because I didn't have a 64. So 64 for me, probably favorite game that I ever played. Probably, because I always usually play it at my cousin's house, so I'd always play like multiplayer game. Would probably have been Smash Brothers, and actually Rampage was really cool.
Oh,
when you were the monsters and you could eat the people and then climb up the buildings. That had like an epic side scroller feel to it, and it was just fun. It was all out destruction. There wasn't really any particular objective. It was just a fun game to play.
It was an arcade throwback.
Yeah, so I'd have to say probably all-time favorite for 64 is probably Smash, and then next to that probably Rampage, and then some of the Mario games come in effect. The pod racing game was really good, and that did really well.
Better than the movie.
Yeah, right? And then for PlayStation, without a doubt, I have to say both the Mega Man Legends games. That was the first RPG game that I played that was in an open world. You traveled to places. Mega Man got upgrades. The storyline was really good. Everything about that game is really good, and it's a rare game to get now. If you can get it and you still have a PlayStation, get it because you will not be bored. The only downside to it was the aiming system wasn't the greatest. It was definitely revamped and a lot better in 2. And it's upsetting because they were going to make a Mega Man Legends 3 exclusively for the 3DS, and then they ended up, just getting rid of it and getting rid of the Mega Man franchise, which is upsetting. But I know there's like a thing online you can play that, developers and, guys made to play a side-scroller, new version that you basically plow through all of the versions of it. But it's upsetting, and I would love to see them remake Mega Man Legends 3 on the Nintendo or something, because it was upsetting that it didn't get made.
Yeah, I must say I've never played that game. I think overall, if we're talking PlayStation versus N64, I don't know if we're going to pick an outright winner in this video, but here's what I'll say. At the time, I think PlayStation won out. I think, like I said, it innovated in ways that N64 just couldn't. But what I will say is I still occasionally play N64 games now. Like, during college, Mario Kart was a big staple, Super Smash Brothers, Rampage, like it lasted the test of time, and a lot of that, some of it is it's a cartridge. It's easy to carry around. You don't have to like think about it. You can throw it around in your backpack. Thanks for watching, everybody. Apologize if is it a little out of frame.
It's probably it may be out of frame.
We're learning still with the whole video thing, but thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for watching. Please below leave your memories of the PlayStation and the N64. What's your favorite game on each? What did you prefer? What did you have as a kid? Were you a total console junkie? Were you on one side of the issue or the other? We want to hear from you. Like the video, please give us that thumbs up, subscribe, tell your friends. We have a podcast. It's on our website, www.lunaticcreative.com. You can find us on iTunes. We're everywhere. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a lunatic day.